Conan, NPR News. This is Talk of the Nation. I'm Neal Conan, in for Ray Suarez. The British media has been having a field day over the story of a computer hacker known as the Data Stream Cowboy. At one point, U.S. military officials believed him to be part of an East European spy ring that gained access to highly sensitive information. He was once described to the Senate Armed Services Committee as the #1 threat to American security. After a 13-month investigation, he was revealed to be a 16-year-old music student who used a $1,200 computer to break into the systems at a U.S. Air Force base and at a defense contractor. His lawyers described it as a schoolboy prank. And perhaps the greatest insult, Richard Price, now 19 years old, said, "Those places were a lot easier to get into than university computers in England." The story appears to fit a pattern of an exaggerated threat posed by computer hackers. In several cases, what are first described as multi-million-dollar crimes are later reduced to considerably less astronomical sums. At the same time, though, some hackers have been involved in serious crimes, including some involving national security. The myths and realities of the hacker threat are our issues this hour. Our telephone number is 1-800-989-8255. That's 1-800-989-TALK. Our guest is Jonathan Littman, author of The Watchman, The Twisted Life and Crimes of Serial Hacker Kevin Poulsen. He joins us from the studios of member station KQED in San Francisco, and welcome to Talk of the Nation.
Thanks, Neil. Great to be on the show.
Let me begin with another quote from young Richard Price, who told reporters in London, "It was more of a challenge, really, going somewhere I wasn't meant to. If you set out to go somewhere and you get there, other hackers would be impressed." Now, isn't that, at least in part, a working definition of the hacker philosophy?
It is. Part of the ethic of hackers is the pursuit of information, and some even believe that information should be free and we shouldn't be charged for it. This particular hacker, Data Stream Cowboy, there was another hacker by the name of Kuji, actually did find some very interesting things. They found some nuclear power plants in Korea, and this really raised the concerns of the Air Force and national security officials.
Is it fair to say that in some respects, anyway, that hacking evolved from what used to be called phone phreaking, where people used mechanical or later electronic devices to fool Ma Bell?
Well, most of the great hackers started as phone phreaks, often because they didn't have the money to buy a computer and would start with their home telephone and gradually, either through school or later on, would have the money to begin hacking computers. There's also a strong connection between phones and computers, obviously, today with networks and the Internet.
Let me ask you to tell us the stories of two hackers, both very different. The first, Captain Crunch, and then the second, the man you've written the book about, Kevin Poulsen, who went on to some pretty serious matters. First, Captain Crunch.
Captain Crunch is the legendary phone phreak from some time back. He was the one who found that the little whistle in the popcorn box that could be used to actually phreak calls, and you could actually get free calls by blowing this whistle. Other people could imitate this sound. Actually, Kevin Poulsen, a later hacker, could do this. One of the sad things about Captain Crunch, though, is he eventually was charged for crimes. He actually wrote a word processing program, and today supposedly is homeless on the streets of Marin County somewhere.
Now, Kevin Poulsen is a hacker who you've written this new book about. He went from phone phreaking to rather more serious crimes, including some that did involve national security, if you would describe those.
Kevin actually was able to determine every federal and national security wiretap in the state of California. And while he was on the run from the FBI, he was able to determine that we were wiretapping the Israeli consulate in Los Angeles, the Chinese and South African consulates, He found a FBI mob wiretap. He found a number of wiretaps in Concord, near the Concord Naval Weapons Station, and this raised extreme concerns by the government.
Now, he was a guy whose, some of whose activities are well, I guess, pretty inspirational to some hackers. He was a guy who managed to hack into the telephone system at a radio station that was giving away $50,000 cars, Porsches.
Well, Kevin believed in the hacker ethic also, but he took it a little farther than most. He thought it wasn't a crime if they were giving away the prizes, and he found that a large station in Los Angeles was giving away $50,000 Porsches. And through some of his technology and his guile, he was able to always be the 102nd caller, and he and a partner won two $50,000 Porsches and tens of thousands of dollars.
He was also involved in less savory activities, including helping to run a prostitution ring. Again, details?
Yeah, it was very clever. You can certainly question the ethics of it. He found out that Pac Bell has a lot of Yellow Pages ads in Los Angeles for escort services, and the numbers are routinely shut down by the Vice Squad. He discovered a way to turn them on secretly and then forward the incoming calls, the business calls, as he put it, to someone who was familiar with this business, and Kevin got a percentage of the take.
So where did he cross the line and leave what we think of as the hacker ethic?
Well, I think he really crossed the line when he started making money. He believes he didn't because these things were given away, but that's a very fine line, and the traditional hackers in the old days, there was this thought that when you really started to do things for money, for large amounts of money, you were crossing over and perhaps entering a criminal realm.
So that if you were doing it to provide information to the world, things that ought to be free, at least to your mind, that's okay, but you start selling it, that's different.
Well, another hacker I've written about, Kevin Mitnick, committed a lot of crimes, and he feels he is guilty of certain crimes, but he always was very proud that he never profited by his hacking, whether it was through fixing a contest or turning on lines. And so there is some debate about what makes a legal or moral hacker.
You wrote an earlier book called The Fugitive Game online with Kevin Mitnick. Could you tell us where the two Kevins are today? Kevin Mitnick, for example, was at one time the subject of an intense FBI manhunt, as was Kevin Poulsen later.
Kevin Mitnick is in the same jail Kevin Poulsen was in. That's the Metropolitan Detention Center in Los Angeles. He is awaiting trial after over 2 years in jail. He's quite rare because he wants to fight the charges against him. He was offered a plea bargain of roughly 10 years, and he wants to bring to court a fellow by the name of Tsutomu Shimomura, who was a private citizen who really led the investigation against Kevin Mitnick.
And Kevin Poulsen is today?
Poulsen served over 5 years in jail, by far the longest, in fact twice as long as any other hacker. He was initially charged with espionage. The government dropped the espionage charges, but there were a number of other charges, wiretapping, computer fraud, etc., and the national security aspects were never revealed. Today, Poulsen is on a 3-year probation, and he is not allowed, interestingly enough, to use a computer or even the Internet for 3 years.
Has anybody ever had that parole restriction before, to your knowledge?
Well, it's just starting to make itself heard. There have been a couple of other cases quite recently where federal judges have tried to have these sort of sanctions, and it's very interesting because now we, of course, are in an age when the Internet is ubiquitous, when you need a computer to check out a library book. And Kevin Poulsen has made these points to his probation officer. His parents had to sell their old home computer when he was living at their home for some time. I think we really need to rethink how we look at how we rehabilitate people like Kevin Polson and Kevin Mitnick.
One other question before we go to the phones, and that is, you talked about, well, this hacker ethic in the old days. Are you seeing signs that younger, new generation of computer whizzes are less restrained than their elders?
Well, I think we always look in the past with a certain amount of nostalgia, and the fact is that some of the great entrepreneurs, Steve Wozniak, Steve Jobs of Apple Computer, were first really phone freaks and hackers in a sense, and actually they were selling blue boxes to sometimes not the best sort of people. They quit that habit, went on to create a great company. I think the lesson is there's always been sort of a fine line in the great entrepreneurs, and they've often started out perhaps with one foot in the dark side. I think, however, what we're seeing now is we are seeing more young kids who don't seem to be taking the step toward legitimate companies and efforts.
So staying in the underground.
Yes.
Yeah. Our telephone number at Talk of the Nation is 800-989-8255. That's 800-989-TALK. No reason to hack anything. You can call for free, as did a former hacker who joins us on the line from Hollywood, California.
Yes, good afternoon. One of your guests, I'm not sure which one of them, gave out some disinformation earlier. Captain Crunch is not homeless on the streets of Marin County. He's running a quite successful computer consulting business. I think it's in San Diego, and he has a web page and everything. So I just want to straighten him up on that one.
Glad to hear that.
Glad to hear it. I heard that on the Internet. You can't believe everything on the Internet.
Yeah, totally. But anyway, the second item is, I guess it was Ray who said 3 years ago, a 16-year-old kid with a $1,200 computer was a threat to our national security. If that's true, then that means that there is no such thing as national security anymore. In fact, I've been hearing that phrase being talked about a lot. And if you recall back during the Watergate period, whenever Tricky Dick didn't want to turn over a tape, he would always intone the phrase national security. National security apparently is becoming like patriotism, i.e. the last refuge of scoundrels. And there's a lot of disinformation being spread about hackers. As I said, I was a former hacker maybe 20 years ago when I was a college student, and there's just a lot of disinformation being spread around about this. So hopefully some people will call in and straighten you guys out.
Well, there you go. But let me ask you, why are you a former hacker?
Well, I have a job now, and I can afford to pay for phone calls, for one thing.
Okay. Is that the only thing you did?
Primarily, yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much for your call. Let's go on to Gene, who joins us on the line from Raleigh, North Carolina.
Yes, I'm a victim of a hacker. I had been on AOL for some time, and one afternoon, or actually one morning, I checked my billing area, and I found that I had worked up a over $200 bill, and someone had been using my account with different screen names, and had been using it daily for a month, and I had not yet been billed for it. I contacted AOL, and they denied this could happen, and I changed my password that morning. I tried to get back on that afternoon, and the person who had been using my account was on. I was denied access because my account was being used. And they had figured out the password in that short a period of time. It was only a matter of 4 or 5 hours. AOL denies it can happen, but I can show them the proof. They claimed I was giving my password out, but even the woman I live with didn't know my password, and she probably is the only one who knew my screen name.
Well, Gene, this is very interesting because what you point out is that what can happen is hackers can get root access at the service providers. In fact, my service provider...
What do you mean by root access?
Well, it's like a tree. You get right at the base access of the computer, and what it means is you have the possibility to control any account. You can change anyone's password. You can take control of, in fact, the whole system.
It's like having the master key that would open any lock in a whole building.
Yes, and that's where you have these contradictions where the company will say it's impossible, and they'll ask the subscriber, were you careful to change your password? Well, changing your password does you no good in a case like this. And
That's
I know
what I found.
Yeah. I know a week ago or so in my service provider out here in California, I could not get into my account. No one could get into my website. This was never explained by the company, but I learned through a little research that they were hacked. A hacker had root access and had control.
Again? I asked that because Kevin Polson, obviously at one point you describe in your book, had root access at your service provider and was reading your email.
Actually, it was the other Kevin. It was
Kevin Mitnick.
But you're right. Definitely, the well. It's a great example. The well spent a lot of money, and really they should be applauded for their efforts. But it shows the difficulty of keeping out hackers. They bought new systems, new computers. They are still being attacked. It is very difficult to keep out tough hackers.
A sequel to my story is my girlfriend works on computers. As a matter of fact, she sells web space for her company and for advertising purposes. And she sent me an email. The email came back and bounced back and forth. I guess this is called an email bomb. And it filled up her computer, filled up their server, and had their system down for a day. And the screen name that sent back the email was one of the ones that was using my account.
Did you ever end up having to pay that bill?
I settled with them for half the bill. It came to over $400. I don't have the time to fight it. They are pretty well screened as far as taking calls and talking to people that will take responsibility.
Well, I guess
that's a good point, Gene. These companies have to be a little more open-minded because there are going to be lots of problems in the years ahead.
Maybe one argument for that 1999 flat rate.
Well, you know that if I'd been on the 1995 flat rate, I would have never discovered it.
Right.
It's because he went overtime. I was set up for only something like 4 hours a month because all I used it for was email.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so I would never get over 4 hours on AOL, and that's why I found it.
Thanks for your call, Gene.
Okay.
Abi now joins us on the line from La Crosse, Wisconsin.
Hi. Boy, I hate America Online almost as much as I hate Microsoft. Anyway, point of my call is I have a big problem with the use of the word hacker. Hacker has a much broader definition than what's being used in the media these days. Back in the early days of the 8-bit computers, I used to do a lot of tinkering in the inside of the system. I would work in assembly language, and I would disassemble the operating system code. Sometimes if I would find a program that didn't work quite right, I would go in there and tinker with the code and make it work to my liking. By all definitions that I knew of it at the time, that is what a hacker does. Now, also within the realm of that internal tinkering is tinkering with other people's computers over the phone lines, trying to guess passwords, and just kind of exploring the innards of these other computers that you connect to. But what troubles me is the use of the word hacker to describe all these intruders and malicious types. I think there are more specific words that better describe that. Yet the way the word hacker is being used, it puts a pretty serious black mark on what's actually a very a very benign and very fruitful activity, a very valuable skill.
Jonathan?
Yes, you have a good point, but what really is the case, I believe, is that the word hacker has always meant a whole range of activities, some of the beneficial, productive forms of hacking that you've talked about, and also some of the more criminal types of hacking, which sort of go over the line. And so there are other terms. Some people like to refer to hackers as crackers, who are actual criminal intruders. But the word has been around a long time.
Intruder would be a good word.
Well, intruder also has, there are other aspects, but I guess a computer hacker, I guess, has been seized by the media and has been applied across the board. If there are more specific terms like cracker, they will require, I guess, a defining case to put it in the national consciousness. Thanks for your call.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Charlie joins us now on the line from Glendale, California.
Yes, good morning. It's still morning. I guess it is afternoon. What I was calling about is I remember the very young Kevin Mitnick years ago. My brother learned computer when he was in school, and he's now working for a rather prestigious company. I won't even mention the name or his name. But I remember when he first graduated from high school, he began working for the LA City school system. And he was the only one that was successfully able to knock Kevin Mitnick off that system when Kevin started digging into things. I believe Mitnick used to go by the name of Phantom. Now, what he got for that is years later, Mitnick used to follow him around every time he moved and find out where he was living.
Kevin Mitnick
on the phone.
Kevin Mitnick did have a streak of revenge, and he was seldom one-upped. And you're right, he would often pursue, at least electronically, people who occasionally one-upped him.
And what would he do to them?
Well, basically, he would know that his phone had probably been tapped because he would get that would ring, he'd pick it up and get a beep, which was Mitnick's little symbol, I found you.
Nothing worse than that, though?
Well, he was always suspicious there were worse things going on. It hasn't happened in recent years, but it did happen a number of times back in the 80s.
Okay. These are the games that a lot of hackers play with one another. There's a lot of competition, a lot of one-upmanship.
I'm Neal Conan, in for Ray Suarez, and you're listening to Talk of the Nation from NPR News. My guest is Jonathan Littman at the studios of KQED in San Francisco. We're talking about computer hackers, including Kevin Mitnick and Kevin Poulsen, hackers about whom Jonathan Littman has written books. We'll go back to the phones, and Will joins us on the line from Seattle, Washington.
Yeah, I'm a hacker, and I think I understand something of the natural relationship between hacking and cracking. First, I'd like to agree with that other caller that most people who call ourselves hackers aren't the kind of people who are called crackers. Most of us don't go doing the kind of harm that you're describing. But the defining attribute of a hacker is the acquisition of technical skill by learning not from a teacher, but directly from the object of study, in this case the computer. So a hacker, as any person whose technical learning is largely self-taught, and the reason we tend to be self-taught is that it's our experience that our so-called teachers are enormously stupider than we are. I had this experience when I was in college. There were computer problems that non-computer science departments that weren't the computer science department wanted to get solved. And the chairman of the chemistry department, I remember, had to travel 300 miles to a different computer center to try to get a problem solved, and they told him it couldn't be done. And he came back and found that I had solved the problem working alone over the weekend. And this was about 3 weeks after the first time I had learned to program, the first time I'd ever touched a computer, because this was back in the 70s, and there weren't any home computers then. So within 3 weeks of first ever touching a computer, I'd already reached a point where I could solve problems that the entire computer science department couldn't solve. And it was like that for me throughout college and throughout my early professional experiences as well.
Will, you touch on an important point. Jonathan Littman, how much of this is the feeling of power that people get?
Well, I think power. It wasn't power. The issue was that the teachers were getting in our way.
Well, I think Will has made a good point, and what you see in most hackers, whether they are legal hackers or whether they cross the line and become crackers, is this sort of wonderful total immersion of man and machine and people really diving into the problem, really trying to understand things. Kevin Poulsen, for instance, was largely self-taught, yet he was able to learn how the FBI's wiretap system works. He was able to wiretap anyone he wanted to in the state of California. He did all this not from reading a book, not from going to class, but by immersing himself in the networks, in the computers, and discovering this all online.
Well, some of it he broke into telephone company offices and stole knowledge from them, right?
That's true. He was unique. Not all hackers sort of had the hybrid skills that he did. He would first break into central switching offices to try to find clues, passwords, and to actually study the systems. He sort of understood the phone network from the ground up.
You're listening to Talk of the Nation from NPR News. I'm Neal Conan. My guest is Jonathan Littman, and we're going to take a short break now. When we return, we'll be taking more of your calls, and we'll hear from a computer hacker. To contact us here at Talk of the Nation, you can either send us email at totn@npr.org, or you can send us regular mail. Our address here is Talk of the Nation Letters, NPR News, 635 Massachusetts Avenue, Northwest, Washington, D.C. 20001. Welcome back to Talk of the Nation. I'm Neal Conan. Today we're talking about computer hackers. My guest is Jonathan Littman, author of The Watchman, The Twisted Life and Crimes of Serial Hacker Kevin Poulsen. And joining us now is Dark Tangent, organizer of DEF CON, the annual underground hackers convention in Las Vegas. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
If you'd like to join us, our number here is 1-800-989-TALK. That's 1-800-989-8255. And Dark Tangent, if you will, tell us a little bit about DEF CON.
Well, it was originally a chance to have a party for members of this network that was kind of going off the air, so to speak. And it grew and it grew until we decided to invite pretty much everybody we could find in the underground. And we decided to have it in Vegas for two reasons. One was it was cheap and it was open 24 hours a day, and so if people got bored and destructive, they could find something else to do. And two, if the thing was a complete disaster, we'd still be drinking margaritas in the sun. And, it turned out better than we thought. And so each year it's grown and grown.
Isn't the idea of an underground convention a little oxymoronic?
Oh, it's great, though. I remember that first year it was impossible to kind of drum up real support. I would fax the Secret Service and FBI in Las Vegas these big taunting notes. You're going to be there anyway, so just come along and speak. And finally I got through to the agent in charge in Las Vegas, and it was great. I got transferred, and I said my big spiel, Dark Tangent, and I'm throwing this convention, and blah, 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 blah. And I got this great pause on the line, and then the agent said, "We are aware of your activities." And I just sunk in my seat. I was like, oh, no. But it came off well, and I'm sure there were some feds there.
And
well, Neal, they have a great game at DEF CON, which is called Spot the Fed, and you have to look around and figure out who among the suits out there in the audience is an FBI agent.
And are you generally a successful Dark Tangent?
Generally successful at spotting feds?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, usually pretty good. I know some have gotten away. Sometimes they come up to me afterward in the corners and ask if I can sell them some I Am the Fed T-shirts when they didn't get caught. And so every once in a while, large orders for Spot the Fed shirts come in. But usually they all get nabbed, and usually they're quite good-humored about it. This one Secret Service agent put up a great defense and got everybody to agree that he wasn't a Fed. And the girl that spotted him was really depressed. Well, later on, Sunday, right before the end of the show, he came up to me and said, yes, I'm really a Secret Service agent. And he showed me his badge, and he said, can you make sure that that girl got her shirt? And then he disappeared. So, they're pretty nice about it.
Okay, let's go to the phones now. And joining us now is Kevin from Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Hi, how's it going?
All right.
All right. I just thought I might be able to provide you guys a little bit of insight. I'm a student at Purdue University in West Lafayette, and there's quite a bit of, I guess you could say, hacking that goes on there, being it's a pretty technological school.
And?
One thing that I know that guy in my fraternity and I do, we do it pretty much every year. The first of the year, all the freshmen come in, they get accounts on the general Unix machine at Purdue, and Unix is pretty easy to crack, and the password file just sits out there, so we take it off the machine and run software on it, a program called Crack, and we get pretty much usually between 200 and 250 IDs and passwords to log onto the system with, so we could send email to whoever we wanted to from their accounts.
And this is in the nature of an initiation, or an initiation of an example of gotcha?
Yeah, pretty much. You know, it's these people make very simple logons and passwords. You know, they use words out of the dictionary, and it's just kind of, well, you know, you're stupid. We're going to get you for it.
Mm-hmm. Do you let them know how stupid they are?
Sometimes we do. I mean, we don't do too much malicious stuff with it, but we do.
Just enough malicious stuff.
But I know I had a roommate last semester too that used his computer to do a lot of credit card fraud too. What he did is he had a magnetic strip encoder on his computer, and he would go around and find people that would leave their credit card receipts in the trash can.
Maybe you shouldn't talk too much more.
Federal felony alert. Federal felony alert.
And he would take that. He would take his credit card, swipe it through his little reader, and it would wipe the encoding on the back of his card off, and then he would...
Let's not give out lessons here, okay?
Okay. But, you know, it's really amazing what you can do that people just, you know, they don't think about. You toss away a credit card receipt, you know, somebody's out hunting for those so they can use your card.
We'll all be aware.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for your call, Kevin.
No problem.
Bob joins us now on the line from his car phone in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Hi, how you doing?
Fine.
Yeah, I want to apologize first of all for being on a car phone. I'm sort of stuck in notorious Boston traffic here, so I can't really pull over.
Sounds pretty good for a car phone, so go ahead.
Oh, good. Actually, I'm calling because there's sort of this bizarre polarization going on your show, where you've got people that are calling that are in the computer profession, that are giving sort of this positive hacker face. And you've got the other people that are calling in that aren't computer people. They're, you know, AOL users. I heard one fellow calling up, and, you know, hackers are bad. They're stealing passwords and that stuff. I sort of want to try and break the polarization. I've been in the computer industry for a very, very long time. I was paid professionally for it when I was very young, 15, 16. And I do not understand, and never have understood, really, the glorification of the hacker ethic. And I think the people that have been calling in kind of proved me out a bit. You know, we had one guy calling in that was, you know, hackers are people that tinker with code, and bad people, you know, intruders, are the people that break into systems and steal credit cards, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, you just had your last caller call up that said, "Isn't it cute? I'm at Purdue. We steal the SC password files off Unix machines, and oh, by the way, I had a roommate that was stealing credit cards."
Yeah, but you don't call that guy a computer hacker.
Why not?
What
difference does the nomenclature make? Basically, when you start tinkering around with the machines, and that tinkering becomes malicious, it doesn't matter what the label is or what the media is. It calls it.
Well, I mean, I think the label is important. I would call his buddy a computer criminal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or you know, someone who's committing a fraud, felony. I wouldn't call that hacking.
And what about the person that called up that actually knew the person and, you know, never made any reports, did anything to stop it? Why?
Well, I'm just saying that the term hacker, I mean, if...
Now, my point here is that somehow or another, breaking into these machines, playing around with other people's accounts, doing things that are slowly becoming federal crimes, thank God, is somehow developed this era of cool. And it's kind of analogous to what goes on in street gangs, right? Where the people in the street gangs have all this justification for what they do, why they do it, why they think it's neat. But potential recruits into those street gangs are taught to think that it's a cool thing to do, but clearly it's not. I mean, you know,
I think there are distinctions between street gangs and anybody involved in the computer thing.
Right. I wonder if I could make a counterpoint, and that is, there are crimes, obviously, that hackers or crackers commit, but I don't think we want to totally do away with hacking. China has no hacking. They have the death penalty for hacking cellular phones. They also have no innovation in technology, and I think we can trace our innovation to the fact that we had fairly loose laws and people were learning on their own, immersing themselves in the system.
Well, China's a terrible example. 75% of the software that exists in China is stolen, and that stuff was hacked in order to get it, getting around copy protections and the rest of it.
Well, stolen because they can't create any of their own. They don't have the potential.
Well, there's no market there to create any of their own because they get all their stuff for free, right? So there's no market system in place. Plus, I think it is analogous to street crimes. A lot of the folks that have been doing when I was back like eons ago when there weren't any personal computers and people were working off of mainframes. I lived in Minnesota, and there's a state system there called MECC, which has since gotten commercial, but its purpose in life was to provide a big mainframe and have students from all over the state, dial into that mainframe and trade information or what have you. At that particular point in time, it was cool for hackers. They weren't even called hackers. It was cool for sort of the arrogant youth of Minnesota to write these small assembly line programs that, when submitted to the machine, would bring the machine down. And the end result was millions of dollars in lost time and state revenue and yada yada. And
well,
how's that different from going around ripping off cars in L.A.?
So those people are criminals.
Sure.
Okay, well, let's not get the criminals confused with the legitimate hackers.
No, okay, you can keep throwing semantics like that, but there's a mystique that
well, the mystique has been solely created by the media.
No, it hasn't. Absolutely not. The media didn't even know about this stuff until...
So well, then why are they naming movies like Hackers?
Because I was just going to finish my sentence. The media didn't know about this stuff until like within the last 10 years, but it's been going on for a really long time.
Bob, I think we're going to have to agree to disagree.
Okay.
Thanks for your call.
All right, take care.
Joining us now is Arjan, who is on the line from Raleigh, North Carolina.
That's why. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you for taking my call. First of all, I have a comment and a question. The comment is that I see these people, hackers, as they are, as geniuses. I'm not a hacker. I don't know that much about computer, but I think that if we don't have these people, how are we going to find out that there are weak spots?
Well, Arjun, I think this is a great comment. By coincidence, you call from the city of Raleigh, North Carolina, where Kevin Mitnick was captured by another brilliant hacker, Tsutomu Shimomura.
And I'm sorry interrupting you, but the funny thing is that I don't have a business of my own, but if I had one, I would say that whether it's the government or private companies, they should go after these people, find them, and use their knowledge. These people are challenging themselves more than they are challenging anybody else.
Well, Arjun, it's actually starting to finally happen. There's springing up a thriving business in which major corporations hire hackers, some of which may have flirted with the law, others may be totally legitimate computer security professionals, and pay them to actually do test attacks on corporations to see if they are indeed secure.
That's right.
But as you also point out, that happened to Kevin Poulsen. He was hired to do a job sort of like that at a standard computer company, and it didn't quite work out so great.
Got his fingers in the cookie jar.
Yes, indeed he
Yeah,
did.
Kevin Poulsen was hired by SRI International, a defense contractor. He worked on computer systems for actually warfare, and fell back into the sort of dark side and began hacking. So I think some people we may be able to rehabilitate, others it's not clear.
Morris joins us now on the line from Silicon Valley, California.
Yeah, I come at this from two different perspectives. In my minority, I was quite apt at hacking into various school systems, and now I'm working in the Silicon Valley, where I'm an attorney and have been on the other side, proving that source code or that product has been re-engineered to which requires some hacking ability also. I got to say that this is done at the direction of directors of corporations, and it's very significant on the balance sheet of these corporations because, for example, the stuff that I was working on went over to Spain and was sold within Spain as a product that was not developed by these folks and just stolen. That's one side of it. You've talked about some very sophisticated hackers, and let me tell you that most of hacking doesn't need to be that sophisticated. It can be spoofing send mail, which is just as changing a file here and there. It can be modifying init files to tell people that they've mistyped the password, in which case they retype it again, and you can keep track of that. So the issue, the sophisticated part of it is interesting, but I would say to you that most of the time, that which is gotten is not using that sophisticated information. And when you do get these types of information, say for example, passwords, etc., it can lead to accessing the internal intranet.
That's very true. Kevin Mitnick actually got most of his access through what we call social engineering, calling people up and tricking them into giving him passwords or the names of other employees and further access whereby he'd actually use the network.
As another point, I'd like to point out to your folks that on the air here that anybody can read anything coming over the internet. You can sniff the internet very easily. It's also such that which you bring down into your computer can be used to actually send information back out to somebody.
You mean like ActiveX or Java controls?
ActiveX is great on that. I mean, what a hack. All you have to do is know the internals of it.
Neil, maybe if I could broaden this to the audience, there's a lot of technology coming out very soon which is going to be called push technology,
right?
Whereby information will be sort of pushed at you throughout the day. Your favorite, your favorite sports shows, updates, stock quotes, and so forth. And so instead of the old way, which you would go out on the internet and grab information, what's about to happen and starting to happen is it's going to be pushed much like a television broadcast. And this raises extreme security concerns because essentially companies will be pushing their way into your computer, and obviously if a hacker got in the middle of that transaction, it could wreak real havoc.
My guests are Jonathan Littman and Dark Tangent. I'm Neal Conan, and you're listening to Talk of the Nation from NPR News. Joining us now on the line is Lewis, calling from Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Thank you, Neil. I want to say first that when I heard that guy from Purdue, I'm glad I bought a shredder. My question is as follows. When I go into the internet, I found and I've seen ads for all kinds of organizations like, let's just say, booksellers who will sell to you on the internet. But I presume that I would have to give them my credit card number.
Right.
So I've been loath to buy anything through the internet because I'm very concerned about laying out my credit card number. I imagine, I read the other day, I think in the New York Times, that commerce on the internet isn't all that the advertisers would hope for. Perhaps it's for that reason that other people are worried about putting out their credit card. Is it safe or not?
Well, the way I look at it is there's two things to it. One, you have to connect to they call them an SSL or a secure server.
Yeah.
If you're using Netscape or Internet Explorer,
yeah.
And you get a connection to a website and you're going to type in your credit card information and you get a dialog box that says, now all of your transaction is encrypted and it's secure.
Yeah.
Then you're fine. Everything you're typing is encrypted. No one can see it except you and the server on the other side. And that protocol has been cracked, but I think it required something like $30,000 in computer time. And if you look at it in that light, anybody can dive in a dumpster. You give your credit card every day to the waiter or to the gas attendant. You don't think twice about it. Just like that, on the internet, if someone takes your credit card and builds something, you have a deductible. If you use these secure servers, it's much harder to get the credit card number than it is for someone to,
So am I understanding that to be pretty safe?
Yeah, well, I would much rather give my credit card over the internet on an encrypted channel to, like, say, Amazon.com if I was buying a book than I would taking my receipt and throwing it in the garbage next to, like, say, a Borders or a B. Dalton.
Take it, take it home and use the shredder. That's what I'm telling you guys.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tom joins us now on the line from Burbank, California.
Quick question. Is the NSA still the agency which is supposed to be maintaining the security of the internet? I know that a while back there was a Yale or an Ivy League hacker who put in a worm, and it bounced out of Germany, bounced to Berkeley. And I remember when he was picked up and taken to trial that his father was the head of that particular portion of the puzzle factory that dealt with security for computers.
That was actually
NSA being the National Security Agency. Go ahead. Go ahead, Jonathan.
It's your ball.
Yeah, that was Robert Morris, and it's a famous case. And
Junior.
Yes, Junior. His father was at the NSA. Famous case. He brought a good portion of the Internet to its knees with what was called a worm, which replicated wildly throughout the Internet. It's still not clear whether something like that could happen today and raises real security concerns.
Which is the agency that tends to investigate these kinds of things the most?
The FBI.
And the Secret Service?
FBI is newly formed within, I think, the last year. There's computer crime divisions in almost every major city. And I think within a year or so, they'll have them all trained up and up to speed. I know San Francisco has one of the cutting-edge sort of computer crime, if there could be such a thing, for the FBI.
All agents are now getting training, too, in computer crime forensics.
Right. There was a little bit of a turf war between them and the Secret Service, which investigate fraud, like credit card fraud, toll fraud, wire fraud, anything dealing with the banking infrastructure of the United States. But the FBI pretty much won out on all other things.
What happens, though, Neil, is often the FBI will work with a private consultant. For instance, in the Mitnick case, they worked with this Japanese security expert who had ties to the government, Tsutomu Shimomura, and that sometimes raises questions about court-ordered intercepts and probable cause.
David in Anchorage, Alaska, you'll be the last caller.
Okay.
Go ahead. You're on the line.
Oh, okay. Yeah, what's the date and cost for the DEFCON convention in Las Vegas, and do they have a web page?
So you related to you, Dark Tangent?
Yeah, that's the convention I throw every year. No, he's not related to me, and I'll pay you your $20 later. It's www.defcon.org, and it's I don't make a whole lot of money off it. It's $40 at the door, or $30 in advance.
And when is it?
Oh, it's July 11th to the 13th in beautiful Las Vegas, the Aladdin Hotel.
Okay, thanks for your call, David.
Oh, do you have time for another?
Very, very quickly.
Yeah, I think computers could be used to for people to give their opinions to politicians in a more democratic fashion than polling, and in fact maybe even pretty much eliminate politicians by just direct access.
Well, a lot of people might be in favor of eliminating politicians, but democracy would you'd sort of cut off people who don't have computers, so there might be a problem with that.
Well, yeah, the Constitution is a representative democracy, not a direct democracy.
Thanks, both of you, very much. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank everybody who called, and my guests, Jonathan Littman, who's the author of The Watchman, The Twisted Life and Crimes of Serial Hacker Kevin Poulsen. He joined us from member station KQED in San Francisco, and Dark Tangent, the organizer of DEFCON, the annual Underground Hackers Convention in Las Vegas. Join Talk of the Nation at this time tomorrow for a discussion about the life and legacy of Jackie Robinson. In Washington, I'm Neal Conan, NPR News.
Today supposedly is homeless on the streets of Marin County somewhere.
Now, Kevin Poulsen is a hacker who you've written this new book about. He went from phone phreaking to rather more serious crimes, including some that did involve national security, if you would describe those.
Kevin actually was able to determine every federal and national security wiretap in the state of California. And while he was on the run from the FBI, he was able to determine that we were wiretapping the Israeli consulate in Los Angeles, the Chinese and South African consulate. He found a FBI mob wiretap. He found a number of wiretaps in Concord, near the Concord Naval Weapons Station, and this raised extreme concerns by the government.
Now, he was a guy whose, some of whose activities are well, I guess pretty inspirational to some hackers. He was a guy who managed to hack into the telephone system at a radio station that was giving away $50,000 cars, Porsches.
Well, Kevin believed in the hacker ethic also, but he took it a little farther than most. He thought it wasn't a crime if they were giving away the prizes. And
Conan, NPR News. This is Talk of the Nation. I'm Neal Conan, in for Ray Suarez. The British media has been having a field day over the story of a computer hacker known as the data stream cowboy. At one point, U.S. military officials believed him to be part of an East European spy ring that gained access to highly sensitive information. He was once described to the Senate Armed Services Committee as the #1 threat to American security. After a 13-month investigation, he was revealed to be a 16-year-old music student who used a $1,200 computer to break into the systems at a U.S. Air Force base and at a defense contractor. His lawyers described it as a schoolboy prank. And perhaps the greatest insult, Richard Price, now 19 years old, said those places were a lot easier to get into than university computers in England. The story appears to fit a pattern of an exaggerated threat posed by computer hackers. In several cases, what are first described as multi-million-dollar crimes are later reduced to considerably less astronomical sums. At the same time, though, some hackers have been involved in serious crimes, including some involving...
he found that a large station in Los Angeles was giving away $50,000 Porsches. And through some of his technology and his guile, he was able to always be the 102nd caller, and he and a partner won two $50,000 Porsches and tens of thousands of dollars.
He was also involved in less savory activities, including helping to run a prostitution ring. Again, details?
Yeah, it was very clever. You can certainly question the ethics of it. He found out that Pac Bell has a lot of Yellow Pages ads in Los Angeles for escort services, and the numbers are routinely shut down by the Vice Squad. He discovered a way to turn them on secretly and then forward the incoming calls, the business calls, as he put it, to someone who was familiar with this business, and Kevin got a percentage of the take.
So where did he cross the line and leave what we think of as the hacker ethic?
Well, I think he really crossed the line when he started making money. He believes he didn't because these things were given away, but that's a very fine line, and the traditional hackers in the old days
the national security. The myths and realities of the hacker threat are our issues this hour. Our telephone number is 1-800-989-8255. That's 1-800-989-TALK. Our guest is Jonathan Littman, author of The Watchman, The Twisted Life and Crimes of Serial Hacker Kevin Poulsen. He joins us from the studios of member station KQED in San Francisco, and welcome to Talk of the Nation.
Thanks, Neil. Great to be on the show.
Let me begin with another quote from young Richard Price, who told reporters in London, "It was more of a challenge, really, going somewhere I wasn't meant to. If you set out to go somewhere and you get there, other hackers would be impressed." Now, isn't that, at least in part, a working definition of the hacker philosophy?
It is. Part of the ethic of hackers is the pursuit of information, and some even believe that information should be free and we shouldn't be charged for it. This particular hacker, data stream cowboy, there was another hacker by the name of Kuji, actually did find some very interesting things. They found some nuclear power plants in Korea, and this really raised the concerns of the Air Force and national security officials.
Is it fair to say that in some respects, anyway, that hacking evolved from what used to be called phone phreaking, where people used mechanical or later electronic devices to fool Ma Bell?
Well, most of the great hackers started as phone phreaks, often because they didn't have the money to buy a computer and would start with their home telephone and gradually, either through school or later on, would have the money to begin hacking computers. There's also a strong connection between phones and computers, obviously, today with networks and the Internet.
Let me ask you to tell us the stories of two hackers, both very different. The first, Captain Crunch, and then the second, the man you've written the book about, Kevin Poulsen, who went on to some pretty serious matters. First, Captain Crunch.
Captain Crunch is the legendary phone freak from some time back. He was the one who found that the little whistle in the popcorn box that could be used to actually freak calls, and you could actually get free calls by blowing this whistle. Other people could imitate this sound. Actually, Kevin Poulsen, a later hacker, could do this. One of the sad things about Captain Crunch, though, is he eventually was charged for crimes. He actually wrote a word processing program, and to